Our first speaker will be Elizabeth, who was raised in the Channel Islands off the northwest coast of France. She worked as a registered nurse. She worked as a registered nurse on the island of Jersey before taking time off to travel around the world. She worked at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center for 9 years. For the past 22 years, she stayed home raising her 3 children. Sadly, one of her sisters died waiting for a lung transplant, and another one was given was a living kidney donor. Her passion is raising awareness for organ and tissue donation and has been volunteering since 2015 with New England Donor Services. Liz is also very active within the Lions Organ Donation Awareness Program, along with other volunteering in her community and town schools. Some fun facts about Liz. As a student nurse, she was in the OR for the first organ donation retrieval on the island of Jersey in 1987. Wow. She raised a Donate Life flag 19,341 feet at the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro with her daughter in 2008. Wow, very impressive, Liz. Our next speaker will be Kenny Leferria. He is a heart recipient as well as a liver cancer survivor. The chemotherapy he received as a child did irreversible damage to his heart. By the time he was in high school, Kenny was in heart failure. He was implanted with an LVAD, or left ventricular assist device, to keep him alive until he was matched with a donor heart. Kenny is a hospital relations coordinator for New England Donor Services and lives happily with his wife, Kim, and their sons, Cameron and Kaden. And our final speaker tonight will be Rachel. Rachel is a liver recipient who graduated from Roger Williams University and currently works for New England Donor Services in their aftercare services department. Rachel received a liver transplant 27 years ago. She has been with New England Donor Services for 3 years and was reintroduced to the organization through their volunteer services and community events. Outside of volunteering, she loves to read and play with her puppy, Ghost. So a great lineup of speakers tonight. Really looking forward to hearing from all of them.
Wonderful. Thank you, AJ. I'll turn it over to our speakers now.
Hi, my name is Liz, and I'm mum to 21-year-old twins, one of whom is one of the founding members of the Northeastern Soda Chapter, and one's at Clemson, and I have a sophomore at high school. I'm the youngest of 8, and as you were just told, in 2010, one of my sisters was donating a kidney to her friend in a London hospital, while another of my sisters, T, was in another London hospital getting a lung biopsy. She had had a cough that didn't go away. She'd never smoked. They did the biopsy. They found that she had 2 lung diseases. One was so rare, she was the 8th person in the world diagnosed with it. And she was told at that time she would need a lung transplant eventually. They didn't know when, because they didn't know the progression of the disease. In 2000, so at that time, she decided, when she found out that in England, 3 people a day die, over here it's 22 people a day die waiting for a transplant, she decided to try and get as many people as possible to register. So she set herself a target of 10,000 people to register, and she said if she reached her target, she would die with a smile on her face, whether she got a transplant or not. 2 years later, she was placed on the waiting list for a lung, and she couldn't advocate anymore outside of the home. She was on oxygen. Prior to that, she had sat outside supermarkets and got people to register. In 2014, she hit her target of 10,000 people. And in December of 2014, she died waiting for a transplant. 2015, I approached Jen at Ned's and asked if I could help volunteer. And the simple reason I do this is because I don't want another family to lose a loved one needlessly because they need an organ transplant and there are just not enough transplants available because there are not enough registered donors. I volunteer in two main ways, informational tables and speaking events. And the three types of people I usually meet who are not registered are ones that haven't really thought about it or have never been asked, those that have incorrect information, and those who will just never register no matter what. I've come across family members and even organ recipients that just won't register. So my focus is always on the first two types of people. With informational tables, you only have a couple of seconds to engage that person as they're walking by. So it's really important to try and draw them in. And I always start off, hello, lovely day, isn't it? Are you a registered organ donor? So I'll get either a yes, and if they say yes, I say, thank you so much for being registered. It's so important. Do your family know your wishes? And that's very important that the family do know. You don't want it coming as a shock if and when they actually were able to be an organ donor. And also by opening up and having conversation with the family, it might encourage other family members to register too. If they say no, then I ask, can I ask you one question? And they say, okay. And depending on the audience, if it's 20-somethings, I would say, if you or a loved one, or maybe a best friend, mum or dad, sibling, needed an organ transplant, would you hope there was one available? And they always say yes. And then I say, do you know 22 people die every day waiting simply because there are not enough organ donors? And then I say, my sister T was one of those. And T is always with me. Sometimes people say, oh no, I'm so sorry. Yeah, let me register. But sometimes I need a bit more. So then I say, would you like to register? Some say yes. And I'll say, it takes less than 30 seconds. If you've got an iPhone, I can do it right now, or less than a minute, we can do it online. I always like to get them to register there and then. If they say, oh, I'll do it when I get home, they will have forgotten in 5 minutes. They won't do it. You really want to get them registered in front of you, because then you know. I also like to tell them that, interestingly enough, out of everyone who dies in the US, only 3% die in a way that they could be a potential donor. And this surprises a lot of people. Most people think they register as an organ donor, they're automatically an organ donor. And I wish that were the case. So they are surprised to realize that only 3%. And I say that 3% could be registered or not registered. And if they're not registered, it's even smaller amount. So that sometimes gets them too. And then I say, the amazing thing is anyone can register, anyone. I quite often get, oh, well, I'm too old. So I like to tell them that the oldest cornea donor was 107 when she died and restored sight to someone. And just this year in May, a 95-year-old donated his liver and saved someone's life. So that usually gets that argument of age out of the way. Some people also say, well, I've aged out of bone marrow registry. So I explain, completely different thing. You can register at any age. The other main barrier is, oh, my health, I'm diabetic, I have high blood pressure. So I like to say, this isn't a medical question. Anyone can register, doesn't matter. If and when you happen to be in that 3%, the transplant doctors will decide if they can use your organs or not. We don't have to worry about that now. You can still register. Then we go on to the next one. Oh, my religion, I don't think. Oh yes, all major religions either let you make the choice or actively support it. I've only actually come across 2 religions that I could find that wouldn't, and that's Roma Gypsies and Shintos in Japan. And I've never, in my 6 years over here, come across anyone that's one of those. So religion takes that off the table. Another big one is, oh, I'll be left in the ER, or I might wake up, you know, from my coma. So I explain that TV shows and movies aren't the real life, and doctors take an oath to save your life. And only when you're legally dead do the transplant doctors get involved. And I explain that being in a coma is not legally dead. So if you're in a coma, you're not going to be, you know, they're not going to take your organs. And then if you've gone through all those and they are still on the fence, you sometimes get, oh, well, only rich people get transplants. So then I explain, no, computers generate the matches, there are no names involved. And if a famous person gets a transplant, it's because the computer has matched age, you know, tissue type, location. And then you have the ones that will still try and debate you. So I politely excuse myself, since they're never going to change their mind. And the person walking by might actually really want to register, but think they can't because they're too old. So I want to try and get that person. Forget this one, they're not going to do it. Speaking events, again, I adjust the wording according to the age of whoever I'm talking to. Always start off, I want you to live very long, happy, healthy lives. But I'm going to start with a question. So then I ask the group, if you or a loved one needed an organ transplant, and that gets them thinking. And because they all say yes, they then have to think in their mind, well, if I would accept one, am I willing to register? And I've had people say, oh, well, it'd be a bit selfish if I didn't. And I kind of say, and then they register. Again, really, really hammer home the point. Anyone can register. And I go through all the points of medical and that kind of thing. And then for me personally, I don't use graphics on my table. I have a picture of my sister. Anyone can register. I don't have the body with the organs. That's just me personally. I've never met anybody that's actually asked what can be donated. I have been asked, oh, I don't want my eyes. I don't want anyone taking my eyes. And I say, well, you know, it's the cornea. It's just a very thin, clear bit. Oh, okay. So I make sure I definitely don't say, oh, you could be an eye donor, because that I feel really puts people off. Other ways I advocate for organ donation. On my Facebook, I have the photo, I have the little Donate Life banner. I post uplifting stories every so often. I used to be a runner, so I went and got my running shirts. I can't see if you can see that, but, and then I had the registerme.org on the bottom, and the slower I ran, the more people can read it. So I definitely wasn't a fast person. Bottom of my email, I have on the signature bit, live life, then give life. Register as an organ and tissue donor with the address. That then goes to anyone I send an email. What else? Oh, as I said, this is my daughter, Sophie, top of Kilimanjaro. Anyone that donated, we raised money. Anyone that donated, we put their name on the flag, and then I gave them a copy of this. But I go to the heights. Christmas cards, wherever we go, I make the children put on organ donor shirts, send it out as a Christmas card. We tend to fly the flag wherever we go. That's Machu Picchu. I think that's about it. So that's what I do to raise awareness, and I'm thrilled to be here. And I just thank everybody for raising awareness so that other families don't lose loved ones. And thank you.
Good evening. First, I want to say, Liz, I do never want to cross you at a grocery store and not register, because I'm sure that you are very convincing, and I appreciate that. My name is Kenny Leferria. Good evening. Thank you for having me a part of this. I have a little bit of a story. And hi, Rachel. Hi, Liz. Hi, Jen. Good to see you. So I myself have a personal connection to donation. First, I'm proudly employed by New England Donor Services. I have been with the organization for just a little over 14 years. Jen was one of the first people I met, so thank you. Good to see you, Jen. But this past January, I'm very proud to tell you all that I celebrated my 20th anniversary of my heart transplant. So I am alive because of what the discussion tonight, because of what we do. And I thank SOTA for hosting this webinar and making it possible, because folks like myself are alive because of the work that we do together. Liz talked about the community and about the advocacy out in the community, and I can touch a little bit upon the advocacy that I do in the hospitals. So as my role at New England Donor Services is I'm a hospital relations coordinator, and my focus is to work with hospital staff and educate staff to understand the importance of having a relationship with New England Donor Services, making a referral for potential donation, and having those relationships and building bridges between our organization and theirs, as well as the transplant centers that have patients waiting for these life-saving transplants. If you hear the children screaming in the background, those are my 2 children. So I apologize if they're annoying. I'm already annoyed now listening to it. So I guess it's, we can all appreciate that. And I think Liz's point of 3% is valid. There are many referrals that we coordinate with our hospitals in New England. And it's a very small percentage of patients that become actual organ donors. So keep that in mind, that the efforts that we do together is essential, because the number is so very small. So any missed opportunity is a huge missed opportunity, because the number is small to begin with. I do get a lot of discussions, and especially when I do educational events at the hospital, as far as the myths and the confusion out in the community, as far as if the hospital is going to save the person's life, and as Liz mentioned, and that obviously is a huge myth and can't be further from the truth, because the hospitals do not have any clue whether a patient is registered or not, whether they're interested in being a donor. That process happens far later, after life-saving efforts have ceased. And so that's a huge one that I hear, especially in the hospital setting with nurses and the operating room educational events that I do. I will say having relationships is key to the process, because I look at this as a 3-prong approach. We require and need folks like SOTA, like you and Liz, and volunteers in the community, Rachel, and spreading the message, because a transplant doesn't happen without the donor. Obviously, no one is searching for a donor. We're not expecting or looking for someone to die. That's certainly not the message. The message is that we would like to try to make use of gifts that become available when something tragic happens in someone's life. And the goal is to try to help save lives through transplant. And we certainly don't want an opportunity and those gifts to go to waste, and if they're not made available to others. And so that's our message. And having this approach with the community relations and connecting with families and folks, and understanding the importance of registering to be a donor and understanding the process is key. And then having the process in the hospital, as far as my connections in the hospitals, and building relationships and working together to have a pathway for a referral to be made, and then having that transplant happen and have those folks at the transplant center get those life-saving organs they need. I also do educate as well and give people a little perspective here that New England Donor Services prides ourselves not only on a mission to save lives, but we're also here providing a service to that donor family. Perhaps maybe we can make a connection with the donor family and provide a sense of solace and provide that family a change of the story, where it's not just that their loved one has died, that's their loved one has become a hero and saved someone's life. And so we do have a multi-pronged approach where we're saving lives through donation, but we're also serving families and helping families through solace and grief and providing comfort. And so I like to kind of remind folks that it's a whole approach from start to finish, not just with us coming in, recovering organs. We're there to comfort the family and provide solace. And our aftercare program provides continued support for a year after the donation event. So it's something to keep in mind. I'll kind of swing back to my personal story to kind of give you a little synopsis of that. So my transplant journey, as AJ shared earlier, started many years ago when I was at the age of 8 years old. I was diagnosed with liver cancer. I had a tumor the size of a grapefruit on my liver. It was a malignant tumor. Recommended treatment was surgery to remove the tumor, chemotherapy, and radiation. I went through that process. The whole treatment process for that particular part of my health journey was approximately a year. I ended up recovering and being cured of cancer and was able to progress in my life and return to school and move on. Approximately 8 years later, I became short of breath and very ill. I remember being in junior high and starting driver's education and being so winded at the end of the day, being so exhausted, not understanding what was wrong. It was the beginning of the fall winter season. And so went to the doctor. They thought I had pneumonia and gave me some medication and sent me home. I continued to decline and worsen that year and went back to the hospital for further testing. And they had concluded that the chemotherapy regimen that I had received 8 years prior had damaged the left ventricle of my heart. It was a known side effect and something that was a side effect that could happen, a very low percentage, and I ended up falling within that low percentage. At that time, the decision was made to transfer me to Boston Children's Hospital to be listed for a heart transplant in order to save my life. While I was at the hospital, I ended up continuing to decline throughout that year, the summer and into the fall. I did need to have further surgery and have the implantation of a left ventricular assist device, a machine that's implanted inside the body to allow the patient to regain strength, allow the patient to remain alive while they wait for a donor heart to become available. It's considered a bridge to transplant. So, and the technology is still used today throughout the region. I finally was stabilized enough to be relisted for transplant. And I was on the LVAD machine for approximately 5 months. I ended up getting the call in January of 2001 for a transplant. This particular weekend, I remember getting the call. I was home with family, and it was one of New England's nor'easters. There was 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it was still falling. People have told me when I do things in life, I don't necessarily take the easy path, and I guess this was one of them. The phone rang, and they let me know the heart was potentially available. I was told to wait and they would call me back when it was a match. And the doctor said, go back to bed and we'll call you in a few hours. I obviously did not sleep much while I was waiting for that call. A few hours later, the phone rang. It was a match, and I was instructed to get to Children's Hospital immediately. Got to my brother and sister were, my father had asked my brother and sister to get in the car, let's go. And they had said, well, why can't we go with mom later? And dad, in his own ingenious way, had said, you're not coming along for moral support. You're coming along to sit in the back of the minivan to wait it down in the snow so we could get to Boston safely. So Alex and Mallory, my brother and sister, to this day, I still call them dead weight. And so it's a little joke we've had for these past 20 years. So off we went, got to the hospital, got to my room in the ICU, and I, again, waited to go down for surgery. The first memory I have after the anesthesia wore off, I remember waking up and telling myself I have a new heart. I could tell instantly that I had a new heart beating inside me. For the first time in 14 months, my hands were warm, my feet were warm. I had this sense of energy inside me that I hadn't felt in so long. And so that's when I knew instantly that I had a new life. I continued to do well and progress well. And I was home 2 weeks to the day with my family, completely recovered from surgery. Other than a few staples and stitches, I was doing really well. There's a lot of things I could share with you tonight, but I do want to be respectful of time. One thing I want you to keep in mind is that, as I shared earlier, a transplant obviously saves the life of that individual. And that is the goal and the mission that we have together, is to save and enhance lives through organ and tissue donation. But I would argue that the mission does something more. It allows that patient to re-enter their life, to go back to their family, go back to their church, their community, gainful employment, get back to life, buy a home, have a mortgage, pay taxes, and do all those wonderful things that we all love to do, that we take for granted. It also does something else. The transplant not only saved my life, but it allowed my wife and I to bring two beautiful boys into this world. My son, Cameron, age 9, and Caden, age 5, would not be alive if it wasn't for the power of donation. So you have to remember that the transplant has a ripple effect. Saved my life, but now we have two children alive that would not be here if it wasn't for the donor family, if it wasn't for the team at New England Donor Services, and if it wasn't for volunteer associations like yourselves, if it wasn't for the hospitals, the whole partnership. Those children are alive because of it. And so keep that in mind, that a transplant does so much more than just saves the life of that individual. So I will close with that, and I thank you all for letting me be here. Thank you for listening to my story, and it's a pleasure to be part of this team.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, Kenny. I really enjoyed listening to your story, and then also Liz as well. It was great to hear about all the ways that you advocate for organ and tissue donation. I do definitely agree with Kenny, and I am a registered organ donor already. So, so I would love to just tell everybody about my story to start. So as Andrew had said at the beginning, very thankfully, I received a liver transplant 27 years ago. So my story is that when I was a newborn, I was my parents' first child, and right off the bat, since they brought me home, unfortunately, they could tell just that something was off. I was more fatigued, and then eventually I became jaundiced. And at that point, they knew that something, unfortunately, was really wrong. And I needed to definitely get medical attention to find out what is the root cause of all of this. So after many tests and many days in the hospital, my parents found out that I had a disease that is called biliary atresia. So biliary atresia is, it does affect more females than males. And surprisingly, actually, to this day, they've been doing a lot of research and they don't even know, unfortunately, what sparks this disease. So what it is it means that for my liver, the bile ducts were not properly connected. So instead of my liver functioning properly and moving the bile throughout safely throughout my body, the bile was literally going around my entire body, which was making me very, very ill. So I say, unfortunately, at that point, they tried to do a lot of tests, and I did have a couple of surgeries before the transplant. So the first one that they tried, it was called a Kasai. And what a Kasai is, it works about a third of the time. So, but of course, it was absolutely worth the risk at that point because I was very, very ill. I was essentially living at Mass General Hospital. So when they tried this procedure, what it is they connected my bile ducts directly to my intestine. And that was just an attempt to either maybe buy more time in order to get on the transplant list. Maybe it would fully work and I would not need a transplant. Unfortunately, neither of those things happened and the procedure did not work at all. So definitely worth the risk, of course, but it didn't work, unfortunately. So at that point in time, they sat my parents down and they said that I needed to be listed for a full liver transplant. And for pediatric, a full liver transplant is more on the rare side. They try to do half. Unfortunately, I did need the whole liver. So I was listed and I had waited for a period of time, and they had to have at one point a really difficult conversation with my parents that if I did not get a liver, then I most likely would not be with them within 7 days. And so that was really, really, of course, devastating to my parents. But they never for one day gave up hope. They said, well, that's 7 days and more than enough chances for a liver to come. And what do you know? It did. So again, as I said, I was essentially living at Mass General Hospital in Boston. To this day, I thank them every morning for taking such good care of me. So my parents did get the call overnight that they had a liver for me. They had a match. And of course, my parents I can't even imagine the relief and the joy and all of the positive emotions that they had experienced during that phone call. So they packed up. They lived about an hour outside of Boston. And so they made their way as soon as they could. And so they had learned that my donor was a 2-year-old male, and the liver was actually coming from Pennsylvania. So my parents we wanted to just get through the surgery. It was about 12 hours. And I only lost 1 tablespoon of blood throughout the entire procedure. And they thankfully were finally able to give my parents good news that the surgery was a success. And I had received my whole liver transplant. And from there, it was hopefully going to be semi-smooth sailing. And for the most part, it was. I think about a week after the transplant, they had sensed a small bout of rejection, which in that time, obviously, I was still in the hospital, and they caught it almost immediately. And thankfully, to this day, 27 years later, I have had no sense of rejection whatsoever, which I'm so thankful for. I still see my wonderful team at Mass General every year, and I get my labs done twice a year, and I'm actually just down to one medication, which at one point in time I was on, I believe my mom said about 20 medications at the peak of my poor health. So to be down to one medication, this whole situation is a miracle. And to be down to one medication is a miracle as well. So absolutely, I mentioned every day I wake up and I think how grateful I am for Mass General, but it couldn't have happened without my donor family. And truly, I owe them the world. I am so grateful to my donor family. Again, and as my parents were celebrating such positive emotions, they also acknowledged that there was another side to this. And unfortunately, there was a family that was going through a very traumatic situation. And every single day, I am grateful for the parents of the young boy to make the decision to say yes, which is something that I very happily share, you know, that I'm so thankful for my donor family, and for the situations in the families where we obviously want people to be registered if and when they are able to, but also kind of segueing into my my view on advocating for organ and tissue donation is for those families and those people who have an open mind. That is something that I try to live with every single day, is just having such an open mind, and just trying to see the bright side of any situation. So again, going back to my donor family being in such negative, traumatic situation, but they had the open mind when they were approached to say yes. And because of them, I am literally here today to be able to tell my story. I'm here to be able to advocate for both SODA and New England Donor Services and organ donation everywhere. So kind of segueing into the advocating. So after my college, I went to Roger Williams University, as Andrew had mentioned. So my advocating really started, I really blossomed in that after college. So I too had been connected with Jen. And so I had done a couple of community events. I grew up in central Massachusetts. So I had done a couple of events that were close to my hometown. And immediately I was hooked. I absolutely loved them. I think that it is such an important aspect to really be able to have in-person positive conversations with people. And like Liz was also mentioning, kind of challenging people. And if they do not have, let's say, a positive view, or if they're more hesitant towards organ and tissue donation, I respect the fact that people have their own opinions. Of course, that's what makes the world go round. But let's have a conversation about it. And I'm so open-minded, and I tell people that I'm an open book. I'm an open book about New England Donor Services, and more specifically, my story. I will tell my story literally to anybody that will listen. And I am happy to share anything that I'm able to. And there have been a couple of situations where people, either at my college or maybe at the community events, after just having those conversations, they say, I'm going to go home and I'm going to register. And I should be better by, like Liz, I'm going to take some notes and say, nope, let's do it right now. But even just having that thought in their head and really just putting that bug in their ear, taking it a couple of steps further, and just asking why. Are there, like we talked about, myths that we can talk about that I can debunk for you? Do you have questions? Maybe there's just some hesitation about questions, and maybe I'm not the person that is going to have exactly the answer, but I am very determined and I will get the answer for you. And as if it's going to move you forward and progress you towards becoming a registered donor, I will do anything. So that's kind of the community side of it, but also just kind of bouncing off of that as well, being in college, being in school, through Jen, I did virtually, of course, because it was in 2020, but I did a presentation for Grafton High School, which is the high school that I graduated from. And it was really, I just loved it. It was such a great experience, but it also taught me that we can be having these conversations with children as this particular age group was as they were getting their license. So it was perfectly pinpointed that they're going to be at the registry. They're going to be asked those questions. And instead, they're not going to be blindly just answering yes or no. Maybe a little memory will jog in the back of their head that say, oh, I remember a presentation about that. Yeah, I thought about it and let's go ahead and do that. So it's just having those conversations. Obviously in person would be better, but we're doing what we can now. And so just challenging that. And also when I was in high school, college, like all of my education, I had mentioned, and I've been an open book from the very beginning. And even one of the side effects, unfortunately, from one of my medications, it's a very, very rare side effect. And when my teeth were growing in, because I was at such a young developmental age, one of the medications actually made my teeth grow in blue and green, which is ironically fitting for New England Donor Services as it comes back around. But yes, so because of the stages of development that I was at when I was taking these medications, all of my teeth actually grew in blue and green. And when I was younger, they didn't want to do a permanent fix yet because I was still growing. At that time, there really wasn't too much knowledge either of what would be the best route for a permanent fix. So I did have to wait it out. And that was really difficult at times because classmates and students and other people who don't understand, it can be rough. And they definitely, some of my colleagues had made some comments here or there when I was a younger student, and you just have to be bold. You have to just stand so firmly in what you believe in. And it was hard at first, but I just let it roll off my back because I just thought, it's just a reminder of everything that I had gone through. And it's a reminder of something that has brought me here today. So if there are people that are giving you more challenges, and if there are people who are really pushing back, and like Liz said, sometimes you just have to part ways, but you must always remain bold and you have to just stay firm in what you believe in, because there are going to be so many more people that are going to be so open to having really positive conversations. There's going to be people really open to hearing your story, and it's just going to fill your cup and it's going to make you feel so good. So I may have gone on a little bit of a tangent there, but I just wanted to wrap in a little bit of what Liz had talked about. And also just being an employee at New England Donor Services. I am just in a different department than Kenny. So Kenny is able to reach a different group than myself. So one of my other departments was in operations, and we would be taking the live referrals from nurses in the hospitals. So a part of my advocating at that point in time was these nurses had very limited time. So my main focus was to have this nurse have a very positive interaction with New England Donor Services. I want to make sure that they know that we are respecting their time. I want to know that we're respecting them and what they're doing, and we appreciate that they are calling in this referral. So that was always at the very point of my priorities, was to make sure, and that's how I view advocating, in a way of creating that positive association with New England Donor Services. And because they didn't have to take the time at that moment to call, but I want them to acknowledge that we appreciate that they did. So that is another route of advocating with the hospital staff. And then in my position now, I'm in aftercare services. So we work with the donor families after the recovery and the donation has taken place. So for 1 year and really forever, we support the donor families. And again, that's kind of just jumping off the perspective of creating a positive association. And, you know, this really doesn't end after the donation and after you leave the hospital. We are still here for you. We are going to send you mailings. We are going to send you support. And that is throughout the year. But at any time, if they ever want an update, if they ever want to connect, anything like that, we are here for them. So that's just another way of advocating for the donor families, creating that positive association, and then hopefully they'll be able to further those conversations and be able to make something positive out of what would be a very tragic and negative situation for them, just giving them a little bit of hope that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And then on the flip side, the recipients of either their organs or their tissues and their whole families are so positively affected by this decision. So those are the ways that I really think about advocating, is keeping an open mind, being bold and having those hard conversations, and just being an open book. And if you have a personal story to donation, if you are comfortable, share that. And people love to hear it. People love to get to know you a little bit better. And you just might be able to change someone's mind. So thank you again. Thanks for having me. And it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel, Kenny, and Liz, for sharing your stories and all your amazing tips for organ donation advocacy. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody in the audience did as well. We have a few more minutes until the top of the hour, so I wanted to open it up for questions. Feel free to unmute yourself to ask your question or drop it in the chat. I can read it out loud.
Hi, this is Judy. No specific question, but just wanted to again say thank you. I've been working some community events here lately, and those myths get me every time. So again, I'm going to take a page out of your book, Liz, and think about when I need to just move on versus have a discussion with somebody about if they will or won't be resuscitated, or what if they do need their organs after death? Okay, if you find an answer to that one, like, I'd love to talk to the person who knows that answer. But again, just really helpful to hear each of your three perspectives and stories, and have a little bit more firm foundation going into these conversations going forward. So thank you all.
I thought it was really great hearing from all of you. Thank you so much. But I thought it was really interesting too that each of you brought in some different perspectives and advocating in the community, working with medical professionals. So in that role, Kenny, and, you know, Rachel, how you mentioned, you know, talking with the nurses and clinical ops, super important too. You know, we're building relationships with DMVs, with hospital partners, with, you know, so many different groups and organizations, and then of course the people that we meet out in the public. So I thought that was really interesting. Thank you all for sharing. Appreciate it.
If nobody has any questions, then I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And a special thank you to Andrew, Jen, and Melissa from New England Donor Services for your help with this webinar, to Kenny, Rachel, and Liz for sharing your stories, and to Robin for planning this webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you guys have a good night. Hope and see you all soon. Thank you.